I'm always excited when I get a chance to lead these meditations because I really believe in the work of the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. I believe in the discipline of Jewish mindfulness. And I'm always delighted and really impressed by, I, it's hard to believe, but you can feel the quality of the intensity of focus, even through the screen. And I'm always impressed by how committed and attentive and open people are, which is really important for the work. So welcome everyone. I hope to begin with that you are looking forward to Shabbat. We live in very interesting times, and whether or not you observe Shabbat, or regardless of the extent to which you do, it is an opportunity to deepen your unfiltered and appreciative experience of life, and to do so without the incessant noise that accompanies so much of our current time and our contemporary culture. In order to do that, it's important to ask yourself and begin this session by asking ourselves a question that God asks Adam in the book of Genesis, Ayeka, where are you? Of course, the commentators are very interested in why God would ask Adam where he is. He's got to be somewhere in the Garden of Eden. There's only so many places he could be. It's not like he's hiding amidst a bunch of other people, because there aren't any, aside from Adam and Eve. The question is seen most often as a spiritual question. Why are you hiding? Where are you located spiritually? What is your current experience? And meditation is meant to deepen your ability to lower your emotional and spiritual shields and be in that space so that you can answer to yourself and to the world that reaches out to you from moment to moment. You can answer the question, where are you? It also helps you develop a greater understanding of what you are sending out into the world. This week, the Torah portion is in the book of Numbers. It's Shalach Lecha, or now it's often referred to simply as Shalach. It contains the famous episode of the spies, when at either at God's direction or as their own idea, there's split understandings of this, Moses sends out, God asks Moses to send for yourselves, Shalach Lecha, people to scout out the land prior to entering into it, so that they can know what sort of land it is. And of course, they come back with reports that the land is good, but the people are giants and are overwhelming, and that there is no way that the Israelites can take possession of the land. This sort of hopeless view and this sort of fearful view is something that we can learn a lot from, and that I'm going to talk about a little before we sit with it today. Just a couple of quotes from the Torah portion. So the first that I want to point out is that God, after the episode of the spies, says that all of those who gave a negative report will die outside the land. They will not enter the land. God says, at Numbers 14:23, none of those who spurn me shall see it. What was the nature of the spurning? Well, the spurning, as has happened previously in the Torah, was, among other things, a desire to return to Egypt, a return to confinement and enslavement, a return to the narrow place. And as the author Thomas Wolfe said, you can't go home again, even if home is enslavement. Once you have experienced freedom, once you have tasted the presence of what you could call God or the divine or the interconnectedness of everything, it's very hard to go back. But it's equally hard to carry an experience of deep presence, of what I call radiant experience, into the rest of life. In the sit that we're going to do today, we're going to try to lower the walls of our individual cities. What do I mean by that? Well, in this Torah portion, in Numbers 13, 18, Moses' direction to the people is, you'll see what kind of land it is and the people who inhabit it. Are they strong or weak? Are there few or many? And what of the land they inhabit? Is it good or bad? And what of the cities in which they reside? The question of what kind of cities do they reside in was important to the commentators. Midrash, an early Midrash Tanhuma, says that some countries rear strong people and some countries rear weak people. And there's a sign by which one can understand this. People who live in open cities are the strong ones because they rely on their might to repel that which threatens them. People who are weak live in walled cities. So the larger the walls, the more vulnerable are the feelings and experiences and might of the people inside. This perfectly reflects our human experience. If we feel ourselves to be strong, we are open to presence and experience. And if we feel ourselves to be weak, we erect strong, thick walls so that we can feel safe. And in doing so, sometimes we occlude the veins and arteries of experience that allow us to flow between ourselves and the world. In unstable situations, in volatile times, in precarious relationships, we can feel that walls are necessary. But when we put up walls, we are in danger of living behind them and being unable to exit through them, to be in the rest of the world. Today, we're going to work on living in an open city together, on opening ourselves simply and through breathing and specific kinds of focus in which I'll guide you, to living in an open city, to being open together, to asking ourselves, Ayeka, where are you, at key moments in this meditation, and to guide that experience through the breath. So to begin with, please make sure that you're seated comfortably in a way that doesn't stress any injuries or incapacities or disabilities or sites of pain in your physical body. If possible, stay grounded by having both feet on the floor, your spine erect but not rigid. You can lengthen the spine a little bit. I tend to walk around sort of, maybe it's because I'm a little bit nearsighted and these are graduated lenses, so I have to look up when I'm reading. I tend to walk around with my head like this. Lengthen the spine by lowering the chin and feeling the crown of your head point toward the ceiling. Either shut or mostly shut your eyes, whichever is more comfortable and native to you. Place your hands in such a way that they are supported and comfortable. You can clasp them, you can interlace the fingers, you can do a mudra, but it's important that the hands are rested and centered. And finally, the breath. The breath is the key to living in the open city. As you breathe deeply and evenly, ask yourself, Ayeka, where is this breath centered? Where am I centered? Move your consciousness from your brain, from your mind, to your physical center. Near your navel, where the lungs and the diaphragm meet. For the next few minutes, we will simply breathe. And when you find your mind wandering, which is okay, it's part of the contemplative process, simply ask yourself, Ayeka, where are you? And bring the you that observes back to the gently flowing breath at your center. For the second half of this meditation, we will shift focus slightly. The first words of the Torah portion, from which it derives its name, Shalach Lecha, has to do with sending forth. As you have located yourself in the moment by asking Ayeka, now focus on the cycle of breathing as a location of intent, and set an intention for the coming hours, days, and week. What will you send forth? And what will you receive? And in what spirit will you receive it? The openness to experience begins with the breath. With the inhale, but also with the exhale, what one is sending forth. Be open to the message of an intention that you need to settle yourself into for the coming week. What will you send forth? And again, when your mind wanders from this focus, ask yourself, Ayeka, where are you? And return the focus to deep inhalation and exhalation. begin to return your attention to the space you inhabit. To this gathering, to this location in time. Prepare to open your eyes, but as you do, remember the admonition of Caleb, who along with Joshua constitute the only contingent that isn't afraid to go up into the land. Caleb says, do not be afraid of the land, in Numbers 14, verse 9. With contemplative practice, you take down the wall of your city. You understand, or can begin to understand, your spiritual location. And you can begin to cease to be afraid of the land, not be tormented by the terrain of our day. This is the blessing of consciousness that we have been given. A brief millisecond of awareness of life in the vast stretch of the cosmos. That is what we have shared today. That is where we are. That is the profound answer today to the question of Ayeka. May you send forth in the coming week strength and peace, and not be afraid of all that comes back, because you are alive and you are conscious. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I want to invite everybody to stick around if you can for a chance to share reflections and Q&A with David. And if you need to leave us, we'll wish you a Tzedchem L'Shalom farewell and Shabbat Shalom. We have an opportunity now for those who are saying Kaddish to do so. The text is going up thanks to Jordan, who's our tech whiz today. And we'll open up the chat if you have a name or names of those you are remembering today in saying Kaddish. We invite you to enter those into the chat, and we'll also invite you to unmute, and you can rejoin. You can join me in reciting the mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal.
Amen. Ta'ar, Yitalam, Yitnam, Yitadar, Yitalev, Yitalal, Medik, Shabarutu, Leila, Minfir, Nikamata, Amaran, Mabin, Amin, Yishlama, Rabba, Min Shmaya, Chaim Aleinu, Alkum Israel, the Imru,
Amen.
Shalom, Bin Ramav, Say Shalom, Bin Ramav, Yaseh Shalom, Aleinu, Va'alku Yisrael, Va'alku Yoshvei Tevel, the Imru, Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody. So we'll bring David back up here, and would love to hear from folks in the chat. David, we already had one request. Where can people find more of your teaching online? That was a question that was asked of me. I don't know if you have a place you want to share in particular, but
I have I saw that and I responded to it. Well, mostly here. Most of the teaching I do is sitting with other people. I do have a David Gottlieb PhD Facebook page where I share some teachings from time to time, but it's mostly in sitting with others, either online or in person, that I offer teachings. I also do teach with Orot, the Center for Jewish Mindfulness, which is also based in the Chicago area. They can be found at orotchicago.org.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, Kinky Friedman passed away. That came up. Allah shalom. So I invite everybody, if you have questions or you have reflections about what came up for you, your experience in that in our sit today. And David, you were really locating us, in the question of Ayeka, and just being able to show up, fully present with that. I generally start with the question of these days of how has this practice been helpful for you now in this moment over the last 9 months, in whatever way. So curious just to invite you to reflect on that.
Right. So the way that this practice has helped me is to have an incredibly long view of the present moment. I tend to rest these days in a concept that I've seen, but I can't remember who to attribute it to, of the intergenerational self. I think that so much anxiety and torment now is because we are atomized as individuals in a culture where connections are frayed. But really, Judaism has a beautiful concept of the intergenerational self. Abraham Joshua Heschel said that the lives of the matriarchs and patriarchs aren't simply biographies to be studied, but lives to be continued. When we see the longue durée, the vast sweep of experience of which we are a part, we can gain the equanimity, the persistence, the discipline, the calm, and the focus to understand that what is playing out is both beyond our control in many respects to directly influence, but within our control in terms of how we respond and help move toward some kind of peace that is hopefully lasting. So, to summarize that answer more succinctly, it is to sit in the ocean of Jewish collective consciousness and memory, and to understand that what we are experiencing is neither novel nor eternal, and that this gives us hope to endure it, to influence it, and to overcome it.
Beautiful. There's been a lot of there's a lot of good comments coming in here. It clearly meant a lot of people, and it meant a lot to many people here. Sally had this question: does this teaching suggest that optimism is a better life choice? I want to invite you, so I want to invite you to reflect on that. Interesting.
Such an interesting question.
Yeah.
Many people who know me will say that I am not an optimist. But my almost 3 decades now of contemplative practice, which began with Zen Buddhism and moved into Jewish mindfulness, indicates that it is not so much optimism as equanimity that is the key. Now, it is true that psychological studies have tended to show that people who have a basically optimistic outlook have better health outcomes, typically have longer lifespans, have fewer psychological and medical problems of other kinds. But we don't know how much of that is easily influenceable and how much of it is genetic. What we can cultivate, regardless of those conditions, is equanimity through sitting with what is, through practices exactly like this. Now, this may yield to and blossom into optimism. It may not, but to do the practice day after day settles one into the ability to cultivate or return to equanimity, which you can rely on, and optimism sometimes is hard to come by.
I wonder, when you were talking about intergenerational self and sort of being bound up in this sort of collective Jewish consciousness, I mean, what arose in my mind a bit was the notion of intergenerational trauma. And I'm also thinking about, in a Buddhist orientation, it's really about not just managing with suffering, but ending suffering. So given your experience and your background, I would love to hear how that sitting with, awareness of an intergenerational self in this longer time span duration, right? That perspective, and sitting in this Jewish collective memory. What's your orientation vis-a-vis, that intergenerational trauma and trying to end that cycle, end cycles of suffering?
Such a great question. I'm going to give, I know people are busy and I know our time is running short. I'm going to try to be succinct, but there are two streams of my own experience that come together in this. One is the academic study. I was a late life PhD. I received my PhD 6 years ago when I was in my late 50s. And my focus was on the influence of the binding of Isaac narrative in the formation of Jewish memory, precisely for some of the reasons that your question is identifying, which is that trauma is foundational to our experience of ourselves as people and possibly epigenetically as individuals too. The study of the story of Isaac, his ability to recover to the extent that he did, to become a successful agriculturalist, a loving husband and father, a peacemaker with the Philistines, around whom he redug his father's wells and redug his own, a marvelous Jungian image, if ever there was one, came in handy for me because 2.5 years ago, I was physically assaulted and very badly beaten. And the process began to make sense to me through the study of Isaac. In other words, this was something that happened to me, but I felt tied to vast levels of experience, both Jewish and universal, through my study of how Isaac could go beyond and yet incorporate what he had experienced. So for me, the experience of trauma was deepened in a medicinal way by the study of text and the practice of mindfulness, to sit with the experience, to practice radical both remembering and leavened with a certain kind of forgetting, so that the experience didn't come to define me.
Wow. Someone just, Linda asked whether, this intersects with, someone like Tirza Firestone's work, right? Which I think the answer is yes. You're nodding.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Just a note, by the way, just quick note, Tirza is going to be teaching a course for us online next year, or this coming year. So we're glad for that. And then there's been some discussion here. There was one question. Lori always has good questions. Lori's got a good question today, of course, where the scouts were sent out amongst other reasons to see how safe and viable moving forward into the promised land would be. It seems that seeking safety and avoiding risk is akin to building walls rather than having faith in moving forward blindly. How do we balance these drives in our lives, safety versus desire for joy and peace? Great question.
It is a great question, and I think it's a question that deserves a lot of discussion. In my study of this parsha, what is interesting to me is how one's experience of others causes one to reflect on oneself. In other words, how interactions affect self-image. The key here, of course, is Numbers 13:33, where the spies say, we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we looked to them, or so some translations say, so we must have looked to them. The commentators hone in on this and say, how could they have known what the other people thought of them? They assumed the worst. Moving forward in strength and openness really requires making no suppositions of how other people will see you. The best physical examples I can give are things like surfing or skateboarding or any kind of martial art where physical balance And readiness for all is the most important thing.
Okay, to make this totally Chicago, Ricky Lippitz, hi Ricky, says very powerful. Please say more about the experience not defining us. Is that Davka? Is that in some ways the opposite of how Am Yisrael became defined by this experience?
Such an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
So the dichotomy at the heart of Jewish history and experience is to be defined by covenantal commitment and not by the periodical disasters through which, ironically, covenantal commitment is renewed. I think, for example, of the various plagues that burst out after the people rebel, the golden calf, griping about manna, this episode of the spies, episodes in more recent history, the miraculous continued existence of the Jewish people has to do with returning to the essence of covenant. Now, that means different things to different people. Some are observant, some take this literally, some understand it as a metaphor. To me, this is what we practice today, is being open to to be grounded in spiritual location at all times, and to use that to go forth to overcome and renew. We can do this individually and we do it collectively. We've been doing it for thousands of years.
Okay, we got time for one more question. Okay, from an anonymous iPhone user. So, who evidently is a female-bodied person who has suffered from sexual violence. Right? It does not make sense to walk blindly into the world and trust, right? From that, with that. So, can you speak to how you would apply that perspective to that kind of experience?
I'm so glad for this question, and it's such an important question. And I'm glad that this person used the word blindly, because nowhere did I mean to say that this is a trust fall type of exercise, like you used to do in acting class, where you would close your eyes and fall backward and try to stay erect because you just had to totally trust that someone was going to catch you. That is not what walking forward in the world with strength is. It is actually not a blindness exercise. It is moving forward, balanced on the surfboard of the moment, ready to move this way and that, but understanding that living in a walled city actually makes you less safe. This is a broad generalization, and I understand, and now from personal experience, that people who experience trauma can't simply walk forward with strength. Sounds great. How do you do it? It begins in the mindfulness practice of sitting with experience and metabolizing it. This is not a job that's ever done. It's easier to talk about than to do, but it's work that I have been and still am currently engaged in. And it means that your city is open because you are strong. You don't need walls because you are ready to confront and absorb what comes. This is also kind of a martial arts metaphor.
And something, if you haven't read Tirza Firestone's book, Wounds into Wisdom, very attuned. So
yes, I highly recommend her work for anybody who's been through something like what that person just shared.
Yeah. All right.
And to answer that last question, what if you're not strong enough yet? We're never strong enough yet.
Yeah. Hard stuff. David, thank you so much. This has been really, really wonderful. Historical footnote, the PhD that David mentioned, I actually gave him his diploma because it was at the University of Chicago and I was the dean of students at the Divinity School at that time. So that little
thank you for that, Josh.
Getting the band back together, All right. Thanks, everybody. It was really good to see you. Want to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. We will be with you. We'll be back with you on Monday. So thank you, and we'll see you. Shabbat Shalom.